So, Asha, how much damage can Trump's nominees do anyway?
Eh, it's complicated. I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal contributor for ABC News.
And I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down into a soundbite or a speech.
Still getting used to Skeet, but I love it. It's Blue Sky's been great, hasn't it?
Yeah, I'm doing an event um, for the Brookings Institution with Ruth Ben-Ghiat on December 5th about about resilience in trying times or something like that. I don't actually know the
Mhm.
topic. I know the topic, but it's something around that theme. But uh, they sent me my bio and, they were like, here's what it's going to be. And they had my Twitter handle. And I said, can you remove my Twitter handle and put my Blue Sky handle?
I love it. I
Yeah,
love it.
it felt good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really doing anything on X anymore.
I deleted all my tweets.
Okay, I did not go that far, but they're still there, but I don't really do much on there.
Yeah.
So
But
speaking of doing much, yeah, yeah.
anyway, so I thought I don't know why I thought we were gonna have a little more time before the crazy completely started. I just remember those days where I would teach on Wednesdays, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, depending on the year. And I remember just being out of pocket for 2 hours and then coming back and getting online and seeing like some insanity. And do you remember these days? It was like
I
during the day, there
do.
was like insanity, and then there was like a Friday news dump, and it was just like so constant and just a roller coaster and people getting fired and scandal tweets. And I thought that we would have until January before that kind of started or restarted. But I feel like this whole floating of nominees, we're not going to get a break. It's starting now.
No, and it's a reminder of what that world was like. I mean,
I
where
know.
literally there were tweets from the then president every day, all the time, and it was always a crazy news cycle, and it was one thing after another, and we're back to that again.
We are back to that again. But really now it's even kind of worse because I mean, just to recap the first Trump administration, it's I have to say, I think what I might never forgive Trump for is getting me to a point where I actually miss Jeff Sessions.
He would be better
Oh
than
my gosh.
almost all of our nominees, right? It's kind of crazy, but
Yeah.
yes.
So here we are. If you thought it was bad the first time around, it's gonna be way, way worse.
Yeah. Hold your
And
beer. Yeah.
hold yeah, yeah. Trump 2.0 says to Trump 1.0, hold my beer. And so we're looking at I mean, good lord. I mean, you have the list, I think, more off the top of your head than I do, but Pete Hegseth for Department of Defense, and he was literally removed from the Biden inauguration for being an insider threat
Yeah, I
by
mean,
the Defense Department. And
yeah, I mean, a guy who's I don't know what his qualification for that position is at all, right? He did serve, I believe. That's about all I could say. And he's a Fox News host. Any other qualifications that you're aware of for that job?
no.
Yeah.
And then we had Matt Gaetz for I think less than a Scaramucci in terms of the time that he was viable, and now Pam
Bondi.
Bondi. Hmm.
Now with Gates, I mean, there's been some talk like was he appointed or was the name floated just as a favor to Gates so that this way he'd have a reason to withdraw from being in the House because there was about to be a very problematic report that was going to be issued. that was going to reveal payments to underage women or something along those lines. I don't know, but I will say that appointments like Gates definitely move the window, right? And people aren't as up in arms about Whitaker being the ambassador to NATO or Dr. Oz, being appointed to be head of Medicare and Medicaid, Center for Medicaid Services, because everyone was talking about Matt Gates and how crazy that was. And now he's out. And so it makes everybody else seem a little bit less bad to people.
So I think what you said is true in terms of the attention was on Matt Gaetz, and it's like, oh, well, these other nominees, as far as we know, except for maybe Pete Hegseth, haven't sexually assaulted anyone. But I don't think that was the plan. In other words, I don't think that
Right.
was a conscious effort from the Trump side because they're in the bubble. I don't think they don't really understand how it's perceived, right? And I think Trump also is just sort of a shoot from the hip type person. From what I
Right.
understand, Trump didn't even know about this ethics report or something.
Right. People
I
are
think
always
he was like
assuming,
blindsided by it.
yeah, people are always assuming some sort of like four-dimensional chess from Trump, and it's usually he's like eating the pieces. So I'm not really thinking that there's any sort of grand strategy here, but that's definitely come up because Gates sucked a lot of oxygen from the room in terms of discussion and criticism of other nominees, and he moved the bar so low that not being currently the subject of an inquiry into pedophilia is apparently like that's the bar, which is kind of crazy.
Though Pete Hegseth has now taken that spot because there's a police report out there of a woman who alleged that he raped her. And the police report is pretty graphic, and it suggests that he raped her while she was unconscious, I think. I mean, that's pretty bad.
It's really bad. I mean, for a guy who would be completely unqualified, even if he wasn't alleged to have committed violent crimes.
Well, and
Yeah,
by the way, Renato, in uh to be heading an agency that has had to do a lot of work to like that has had a sexual assault issue
right.
in it, and in terms of reporting and figuring out structures to address it in various, at various levels. I mean, it's really a slap in the face to all of the people who have tried to address that issue in the Defense Department, and especially the women, or I guess men and women, who have been victims of sexual assault in the military.
Yeah. I mean, and very serious scandals there, where there's been, I mean, sort of endemic issues in certain parts of the military. I'll just leave it at that. So, yeah, no, I think it's a real concern if you're a servicewoman and you have felt like you have been sexually harassed, let's say, or you're worried about sexual assault, and suddenly Hegseth has got his photo in every DoD facility, and that's what you have to walk into every morning. I think you obviously have to be concerned about whether or not your rights would be protected, whether there would be a full investigation if you were a victim of a crime.
Completely. So, and we of course can't overlook RFK Jr. Being nominated for the head of Health and Human Services. I mean, that's really scary too.
Well, it's underrated in terms of its impact because I think people saw it coming after the endorsement of Trump. But I will just say, when I'm looking at this from a vantage point of somebody who is at a lot partner at a large law firm and has a lot of clients and talks to other lawyers all the time, that appointment is the one that is generating the most discussion about from companies because it could have a massive impact on our economy if he's something like, look, I'm not going to let you sell your food and your pharmaceuticals in the United States, or I'm not going to let everyone get vaccinated anymore, or whatever his wild theories are about food and drugs. I mean, he's got some pretty strange out of the wall views, And if, let's say, all of your 100,000 employees depend on being able to sell vaccines or sell a particular kind of food product, that could be a huge problem.
I think that's true for a number of agencies too, right? Like if you look at the Department of Education, and they suddenly slash, let's say they
Hmm.
slash the school lunch program, or I mean, they're talking about eliminating the entire department. Maybe they'll do that. I don't know, but let's say at the very least they slash the school lunch program. There are contractors in different cities that provide that to the schools. And I mean, those people are going to be out of business because I'm sure that is a major contract to be had for different providers of those things. So it's like these people don't understand the downstream effects. And we haven't even gotten to the Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, whatever, slash and burn doggy committee. I refuse to call it Doge. I call it the doggy committee. The
Doggy.
doggy, isn't it DOGE?
Yes, that's pretty
I'm
funny
not
though.
calling it Doge. That's Elon
That's too
self-promoting. So
cool.
it's
Yeah,
too
that's too
cool. So we're
cool.
going to call it the doggy committee.
Okay, I love it. I love doggies. I have a little doggy, so I think doggies are great. I would
Okay.
prefer it if it was called the doggy committee. Actually, I would more want to be part of that department if it was committee or whatever it is, advisory group.
I don't even know
Well,
how that's legal. Like
well, you
it's
could call something what you want. I used
but
to.
I'm just saying, like, are they just an advisory? Like they're just randos on the
Yeah,
side that are recommending things to just
right. It's
obliterate
like
in the
if
government?
Yeah, it's like if I called my 8-year-old Hyundai Sonata the Batmobile. Like that doesn't mean it is a Batmobile. It is the Batmobile. I just call it that. So that's great. Like I have a Batmobile, but yeah. So they have a department, and I will tell you, it creates a lot of confusion. And I have people asking me, particularly I do a lot in the financial services space as a lawyer, and people are like, okay, who's going to be the new SEC chair? Who's going to be the new CFTC chair? And then the next question is, will there be an SEC or CFTC, or will the Doge committee,
The doggy
uh,
committee.
will the doggy crew, will they like come in and just get rid of these agencies altogether? And it's like, I don't even know how you can do that. Like there's legislation that establishes that we have an SEC and a CFTC. It's not like Elon Musk and Vivek have like a conference in some conference room somewhere and decide, we're gonna repeal the Commodity Exchange Act or something. But like there are people concerned about that. There are people who really don't know who they're going to be regulated by. It's sort of a bizarre way of trying to reform government, but that's where we're at. That's what you voted for. Like you F around, you find out. So that now we're finding out.
Now it's interesting because the FBI does not have a legislative charter.
Yes, although the guy that they are that Trump appointed for FBI director, the MAGA types don't like him. Have you seen the criticism of that guy?
Wait, which
There,
one? Cash?
uh, no, not him. But isn't no? There's a congressman.
Mike
There's a right.
Rogers.
Yes, they don't like Rogers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is interesting. I
Because
don't
he
know.
was, I think in the beginning, he was like moderate. That's what
Yes,
I remember.
yes,
He was much more measured. During the Mueller investigation, he thought it was worth investigating. Um,
correct.
yeah.
He's too normal. He also authorized FISA. So there's things they don't like. He's like too mainstream. So they're concerned about him, which is interesting because that's one of the roles that you could actually potentially, get rid of. It's part of the DOJ, technically, if I
Yeah.
recall.
So you could, I guess the attorney general could abolish the FBI.
Yes. So whereas the SEC or something like that there's an actual law that establishes, it's like a little harder to do.
Yeah. Same with the rest of the intelligence community. The rest of the intelligence community is established by the National Security Act of 1947. So the CIA, the NSA, um, I forget what other agencies are in there, but those are all legislatively chartered. But yeah, interestingly, the FBI isn't. But so let's just talk about, let's go through and talk about what like if you really had a complete anywhere from the spectrum of buffoon to sociopath running the agency, what can they do? And I think it really depends on what the position is, the agency or the remit. Like, so you talked about
Mm.
Matt Whitaker as the ambassador to NATO.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, to me, I don't know. First of all, I don't know that Matt Whitaker knows anything about foreign policy. Like, he does not strike me as a foreign policy expert,
It's
as
like
far as I
a
know.
prosecutor from Iowa. That's sort of what I know
Okay,
about him.
so I mean, there's a lot that of damage that we can do when it comes to our role in the NATO alliance, but I feel like that is really in Trump's hands. You know what I mean? Like a lot of that is about the decision to deploy troops, for example, if a NATO ally is attacked. I don't know that Matt Whitaker being in a room of other NATO ambassadors, like I just think that they'll just ignore him.
I think that's right, Asha. And I think that an ambassador role in its nature is different to some extent than running an agency.
Right.
Right? I mean, even if you're an ambassador to a country, like you're the ambassador to the Czech Republic or something, yes, there is embassy and their staff
You're just
who
a
are, but
representative and a messenger of the country's positions and policies.
right, and you have certain roles. There are certain things that an ambassador does for the, for to protect U.S. interests and this and that. But but running an agency is a wholly different thing. And you mentioned your kind of top line question is if you're a buffoon or if you're like evil. Let's just put it that way. What can
Sociopath.
you do? Sociopath. Thank you. What can you do? I think a buffoon at the head of any federal agency can't really do anything. I think you have to be really smart to achieve goals as the head of an agency. And I think a good example of that is Bill Barr. I did not like Bill Barr. I was highly critical of Bill Barr. I would put Bill Barr in the evil category. But he was very skilled at doing his evil things. Like he was very good at talking out of both sides of his mouth and using the various levers of the Justice Department to like get Trump to his goals. And that was actually problematic. And he accomplished a lot of things like interfering in SDNY investigations and interfering in the sentencing of Flynn and all sorts of other things that were very highly problematic, appointing that Durham guy to be have his own investigation of Mueller thing. So I think, if you have somebody highly skilled and have bad intentions, that's the biggest potential problem or threat there is.
Yeah, the more discretion they have also. So, I wonder uh, for me, I think the Justice Department is sort of the the one I'm most worried about really. Because I don't know, I feel like that's the jewel in the crown of our kind of administrative state, really. Because it kind of underpins the rule of law underpins everything else. So an attorney general who comes in and, for example, rescinds the attorney general guidelines that govern how the FBI conducts its investigations could lead to all kinds of civil liberties violations. It could allow for weaponization of the Justice Department against enemies. Um, in terms of the other agencies, you can talk more about the regulatory agencies for the financial sector. I just don't know because a lot of those are enforcing like laws on the books, but I guess I just don't know if they have the same kind of discretion that the attorney general does to change the entire rules that govern those kinds of investigations.
I mean, well, investigations are one thing. Okay, it's
Mhm.
fair to say that there can be, I think, there could be a very significant change. Let's say, depending on who you have as SEC chair or CFTC chair, they could just decide, okay, all the open and pending cases are going to dismiss. I mean, they could do that. So let's just say there's all these pending crypto cases, like the new SEC chair could just become dismissing them all. So that definitely could happen. I think with a chair of and a head of an agency like that, like if Trump put the right person in control, I think the other issue is now, of course, there's commissioners, and so he'd have to appoint multiple people and get votes. But our business community in the United States follows all sorts of regulations that the SEC puts out there, and makes all sorts of disclosures, and follows all sorts of rules that are promulgated by the SEC, for example. If you had somebody who is completely off the wall, which I don't think we will get, okay, I don't have any reason to believe that would happen, but you could have businesses just not being regulated at all on certain matters, like what they disclose to the investing public about what they're doing, or something like that. I mean, you
Doesn't
could have.
that though end up having, because then if like there's a major corporate, cover up of some kind and people end up losing a ton of money. In other words, I feel like the bottom line, and the second order ramifications of that actually impact ordinary people and even other
uh,
companies. Like, in other words, this seems like a
yes,
sector that kind of needs to have, like, even the corporate interests want to have some predictability and rules around them.
100%. The reason I'm mentioning this, and like I've been talking about the impact on the FDA, I'm talking about the impact on the SEC, because that can have a massive effect on the lives of ordinary people, in a tremendous way, in a way that like it's not as immediate of an impact unless we're doing something, unless troops are rounding us all up and putting us into camps. Like the DoD will impact people who serve in the military and will
Right.
impact our interests more, but it's kind of a more ephemeral thing. But like if you can't get your vaccine for your kid anymore, that's a problem. For the SEC, that could just upend how a lot of companies work. And yeah, companies want certainty. They want rules of the road too. And if you don't have them, what ends up happening is there's like the ebb and flow, Asha. When there's less regulation, there ends up becoming more wrongdoing and fraud
Yeah.
and enforcement matters. So what ends up happening is then Democrat comes in and finds all this fraud and all of these bad actions, and brings all these enforcement matters, and so it ebbs and flows. But I will say, having good people in charge of agencies that people rely on, to form their lives and to conduct business and to do all that sort of stuff in the country, just to kind of keep everything running, is kind of important. Like that's like even the
Like
DOT
the
department.
FDA,
Yeah, yeah, that's huge. Having a good FDA.
like knowing that what you're buying at the grocery store isn't going to kill you.
Well, that's what I mean. Or like, there's a lot of people who work at like Purdue Pharma, or they work at like Pfizer or whatever. Like there's a lot of Americans who just like work at companies that are actually relying on automakers, right? They need to make sure that whoever runs NHTSA is not crazy, or whatever. So I do think there are ways in which we don't even realize. I think the average person doesn't realize how many of these bureaucratic agencies impact their lives, but they do, like in very real ways. Like you need to make sure your car seat doesn't kill your kid, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I feel like I need to reread Upton Sinclair's The Jungle.
Yeah.
That was, like, about the meatpacking industry, right? And, like, how crazy that was before that got regulated.
We've had a couple of spurts in our country of regulatory activity. Right around that time, there became afterwards a regulatory push, but obviously during the New Deal
Yeah.
and afterwards, in the 50s and 60s, there was and 70s, there was all these regulatory agencies got set up, and without them, there's just so many things that we take for granted, and businesses rely on it and create their products and services based on these rules being there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So in terms of a more invisible, role, like a role that doesn't necessarily impact people directly, but I think is really important because it does impact people at at a order of magnitude that's greater, if it goes wrong, is the DNI. The director of national intelligence is there to coordinate among the intelligence agencies, make sure that we're getting the information we need to understand the threats that are coming from our adversaries, make sure that we're equipping ourselves against them, working with our allies, which is so important now, given things like cyber threats and, um, space and undersea hybrid warfare and all these things. And you get somebody like Tulsi Gabbard. in there who sympathizes with our adversaries, this is a problem.
Yes, it's interesting, and by the way, this is, I think, the value of having two different perspectives. I'm sitting here worrying about, auto dealers and people who put eggs in your grocery store or whatever, and you're like, "Hey, what about our national security and the ability of the United States to defend itself?" I mean, to me, there's a certain irony, Asha, that Putin was a KGB officer. He was there for quite some time. And the KGB's ultimate goal was to sort of defeat the United States intelligence apparatus. And wouldn't it be crazy an amazing victory for them to essentially destroy it from within? By
Yes, if
having,
you have somebody who sympathizes, I mean, they get really mad when you call her an asset. Fine, she's a useful idiot. What difference does it make?
mhm.
The point is that she sympathizes with Russia for whatever reason. And right now, our intelligence agencies are sitting on a trove of intelligence for that in order to help Ukraine, which means, it's intelligence that Russia would love to get their hands on, in terms of what we know, what our sources are, what our methods are. Um,
Mhm.
I have some serious concerns, and I really think that we can expect for sure that our allies are not going to be sharing information with us. Not just on Ukraine, but I think perhaps on other stuff, because sometimes some of these sources and methods are giving information on multiple things. And if they're worried about anything being compromised, then they're not going to share it. And that puts us at risk.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, we take so many things for granted. I think, if we want to say a theme of all this, Asha, there's so much that we take for granted from beginning to end here of all these different agencies we've talked about
And
that.
that and that there are generally competent people running them who, even if they don't agree, they're fiddling around with this regulation or that regulation within it, they're not there to actually burn the whole thing down.
Yeah, and I think as a practical matter, we're gonna have to start seeing how much they're going to actually burn everything down, until there's pushback from their own voters. We just don't know.
Well, when they start getting sick, when they start getting hurt, when all of a sudden the rural workers are like, "What do you mean my kid's not getting lunch in school?" Um,
Yeah, when their company starts.
when their 401k tanks.
Right. And potentially where their company has massive layoffs, because suddenly they can't sell the products that they thought they were able to because RFK Jr. says that they're unhealthy or whatever, unsafe or something along those lines.
Yep, we're about to find out. So Renato, the New York case, I think Judge Mershon just indefinitely paused it. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, I'll call it a slow death. In other words, there was a sentencing on the books, for I believe it was November 28th.
Mhm.
And Trump's team said, look, we're going to raise all these issues. We think since he's the president elect, he's immune from state prosecution. And that's not a trivial argument. There's never been the president elect of the United States where a state of the United States is like, we are going to potentially imprison the incoming president of the United States. And effectively, from a constitutional perspective, the executive branch largely flows from the president. And he obviously, in this case, he has a very central role in the U.S. system. Just there are huge problems associated with that I think are worthy of at least discussion and briefing and so on. So the judge is basically saying, I'm not getting rid of the case, but I'm pausing all of this so we can consider those issues. But just looking at the clock here, Asha, we are now in late November. It's almost December. Trump will be President of the United States on January 20th. I just think the only way there was going to be any kind of sentencing is if there was a rush to a sentencing. And I always suspected that that wasn't going to really happen in any event. And to me, this is really kind of a recognition by everyone in that case that whatever happens, it's not going to really happen before Trump becomes the president.
Yeah. I mean, are they gonna actually litigate those issues though? Because I think there's all okay, so I'll give this argument. Sometimes, especially I think here where whatever the punishment, the sentence is gonna be is likely to not be that punitive. Like even if he were
Sure,
to get it, right?
sure.
That sometimes litigating it could be a greater risk. Because can you imagine if this were to get litigated, go all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, "No, states cannot, ever prosecute." In other words, they set in stone something that is right now an unsettled question of law. My point is that sometimes it's better to have things that are a gray area than to have it settled in a way that we don't like. I mean, in some ways, we kind of learned that from the immunity opinion. I think it was right to pursue those cases. And I think there was no way, as we've discussed before, to imagine that the court would go there. But that is the risk that you take, that you press the issue and then the line comes down in a way that you don't really want. And that then you're stuck with basically for a long, long time, if not forever.
Well, I think this mirrors in many ways, Asha, the discussion that you and I had with Ken White the other
Yeah.
day in a prior episode. We are talking about, if you had hindsight, what would you have done, in the Jack Smith scenario, right? And I think here you're right that if this gets litigated out, we know what the United States Supreme Court would say. It would not be good, and it would set a very unfavorable precedent. Now, there are a lot of people right now saying there's been a mantra that has been catching fire on Blue Sky and other places. Don't obey in advance, right? Like fight everything. And if you do fight this here, there's no question in my mind that the result would be, first of all, I don't even think there would be a result before January 20th. I just don't think this would all get resolved in the courts. That jury trial that I spent months working on, and we've heard about in this podcast, that case was charged in 2020. So here we are almost 4 years later. I was doing a trial. Reality is courts operated very slowly. So I don't see this issue getting resolved. I think what would end up happening is might get resolved at one level. Maybe Judge Merchan would have a view, maybe even a level above him. But would the United States Supreme Court weigh in on this before January 20th? Probably not. They might not even weigh in, and then it'll get denied as moot once he's the president of the United
Right.
States. And so that's one way it could go. Or, like you said, it could go in a very bad direction, potentially, with an opinion that's very much dictated. There's an old saying, bad facts make bad law.
Yeah.
Given the circumstances and who the Supreme Court is, you're going to have a certain decision. So there's a cost that comes with, pushing this issue. It's not necessarily the wise thing to do.
Yeah, and I think it gets to the difference between obeying in advance and being strategic in certain ways. And I think it's really important to parse through the difference between them in any given situation. We talked a little bit about Jack Smith closing up shop. And on the one hand, you could see that as he's obeying in advance. He should just keep plowing through until he gets fired. But as we discussed, there are actual strategic advantages to closing up shop now because there can be a certain justice interest that's served by him being able to produce a report about what happened. That's very different to me than this judge in DC, Judge Nichols, who wants to delay. I think he's delaying sentencing, or he's putting off the trial. He's doing something with January 6th defendants,
right,
in anticipation that Trump is going to pardon them. To me, that is obeying in advance, and that is because that's not like I have 2 paths and one, you know, there's a definite outcome in one path and therefore this other one, you know, makes more sense. That's a purely speculative, uh, you know, decision. Like, in other words, he's making a decision based on speculation and speculation about some prerogative that another branch has. Like, to me, I don't know. It's not it
Right.
doesn't even impact Trump. Like, it's just about, like, well, I mean, because you could say that really about anybody, right? Like, anybody being tried could be pardoned by President Trump. So, I guess everybody should just we should just wait around and not try or sentence anyone in federal court.
I hear you, and I think the message that I think I would want to send to our listeners and our viewers is that, you know, we use we always talk the whole title of our podcast is it's complicated. The decision about what to do when you're facing injustice is not always a simple one. And throughout history, whether it was people in the civil rights movement dealing with tremendous injustice by government, you know, people in other regimes that have had to deal with injustice that they're seeing from government, it's not always as simple as just like throwing rocks in every you know every time there's a potential target. It's about being strategic and trying to do everything you can to fight for a just result and to sort of move things in the right direction. And sometimes that means, you know, fighting every fight, and sometimes that means being strategic. To use your word about the fights that you take.
So before we go, you and I a few weeks ago discussed our exciting travel plans, but it happened to come in an episode right before the election, and that episode was overcome by events and kind of moot, and I'm not really sure anyone listened to it to the end. I'm sure they didn't because it was I don't know, just listening to it probably was depressing and pointless.
No kidding. Boy, it's crazy how quickly things change there.
Yeah.
And I will tell you what has changed for me is I am even more looking forward to a vacation than I was at that time. I don't know about you.
100%. So, for those of you who did not listen to the end of that podcast, Renato and I are going to host an 11-day cruise next July 20th from Copenhagen to Iceland. And we would love our listeners to join us.
It's going to be a lot of fun. In fact, it's something that my wife is bringing up to me all the time because she's so looking forward to this trip. It's I think for me, and I think for you as well, Asha, these are countries that we've never been to. I have never been to Iceland. I've never been to Denmark, and so it's an opportunity to go to like I think it's gonna be Denmark, Norway, Scotland. I
Sweden.
oh Sweden. I thought
Yeah.
we'd go to the UK and go to Scotland on the way to Iceland.
Do we go to I don't know.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
that's cool.
amazing. It's super
Okay.
cool. It's
Yeah.
super cool. The whole thing is gonna be fun, and it's on a really high-end cruise line, Oceania Cruises, and it's gonna be just an awesome experience where we're gonna be on a smaller ship, so we're gonna have like, time to actually hang out. I think you and I are gonna have some, like, events on the ship where we're gonna do Q&A and that sort of thing as well, so we'll have a
We'll
chance to get to know everybody.
we'll do wine and fries on the ship.
Oh,
So, if you're interested, you can call the travel store at 800-777-6540. So that's 800-777-6540. Or you can go to either of our websites, and there is an ad on my website. It's right on the homepage. I don't know about yours, Renato.
it will be by the time
Oh.
this podcast comes out.
Yeah. But and we'll be posting about it on Blue Sky and uh Instagram. I know I've posted about it in Instagram too. So think about it. It'll be really fun. We all need a break. I'm sure we're going to need more than a break by next July. So I know that I'll be happy to get out of Dodge, I think, for 10 days.
100%. And in the middle of summer, I can't think of anywhere that I'd rather be than Scandinavia.
And with you, Renato. I'm excited that we're going to be hanging
Absolutely.
out.
This could be a lot of fun.